Margaret never thought it would happen to her. After 50 years of marriage, she and her husband had built a life together. Children, memories, quiet routines. But lately, the silence between them felt heavier. Conversations had become predictable, almost scripted. The warmth that once defined their bond seemed distant, replaced by an unspoken disconnect. Was it just aging, or was there something deeper at play? You're not alone if you've ever felt this shift in your marriage. Many women over 70 experience an invisible wall growing between them and their husbands, built not from a lack of love, but from truths too difficult to admit. Today, we're uncovering 12 hard truths about why women over 70 feel distant from their husbands. Some may surprise you, some may feel painfully familiar, but all will give you the clarity you need. And the first? It's something most of us never see coming. 1. You've grown in different directions. Margaret always thought marriage was like a dance, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always moving in harmony. Lately, though, she felt like she and her husband, Richard, were on different dance floors entirely. She loved waking up early, savoring her morning tea while journaling. He preferred to sleep in, grumbling about aches and pains before flipping on the news. The things they once enjoyed together, long drives, trying new restaurants, even laughing at the same silly jokes, had faded, replaced by separate routines that rarely overlapped. At first, she told herself it was natural. After all, people change. But then she caught herself feeling lonely, even when Richard was right beside her. She wondered, are we just two people living under the same roof? This is a reality many women face. Over time, people evolve, and their interests, values, and ways of experiencing the world shift. Maybe you've embraced a new outlook on life, seeking adventure, self-discovery, or deeper connections, while your husband is content with familiarity. It's not that love has vanished, but the rhythm of your life no longer syncs the way it used to. The key isn't to force him to change or to abandon your growth, but to find small moments of reconnection within the change. Margaret decided to reintroduce a lost tradition: weekly evening walks. At first, Richard resisted, but as they strolled together under the dusky sky, they found themselves talking about things beyond the day's chores. Little by little, the distance didn't feel as vast. If you've grown in different directions, start small. Find one thing you can share again: a hobby, a simple ritual, or even a meaningful conversation. Growth doesn't have to mean growing apart. Sometimes it's just about reaching across the gap. 2. Conversations have become surface level. Margaret sat across the table from Richard, spooning soup into her bowl as he flipped through the mail. "How was your day?" she asked, out of habit more than curiosity. "Fine. Yours?" "Fine." And just like that, another evening of silence. She missed the way they used to talk. They once stayed up for hours discussing dreams, books, and even silly things like what they'd do if they won the lottery. Now, most conversations revolved around what to buy at the grocery store or which doctor's appointment was coming up next. Many couples experience this shift. Over time, conversations become functional rather than meaningful. The deep, intimate exchanges that once built emotional closeness start to fade. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Margaret decided to shake things up. One evening, instead of their usual routine, she placed a small box of conversation starters on the table. "Let's try something," she said, pulling out a card. "What's one thing you've always wanted to do but never have?" Richard looked at her, a little skeptical at first, but then he surprised her. "Always wanted to go on a train trip across the country," he admitted. It was a small moment, but it reminded Margaret of something important. Sometimes we don't realize how much we miss meaningful conversations until we start having them again. If your conversations have become surface level, break the routine. Ask a question that isn't about daily logistics. Share a memory. Be curious about his thoughts, even if you think you already know them. Connection starts with conversation, and depth doesn't happen by accident. It's something we choose to create. 3. Unspoken resentments have built up over time. The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Margaret had never been one for confrontation, and Richard wasn't either. That's how, over the years, small hurts turned into quiet resentments. The time he forgot her birthday. In the years she felt like she carried the emotional weight of the marriage. The way he shut down whenever she needed reassurance. Margaret had always convinced herself to let things go, but deep down, they still stung. She wondered if he felt the same way, if he too carried grievances he never voiced. Resentment is like dust. It doesn't settle all at once. It builds up over time, so gradually that one day you look around and realize everything feels heavier. Many couples don't even recognize it's happening until they feel the weight of the silence between them. The hardest part? A lifetime of unspoken feelings doesn't just disappear on its own. It takes courage to address them. One evening, Margaret finally spoke up. "You know, I've never really told you, but it hurt when you forgot my birthday that year." Richard looked up, surprised. I didn't know that. I thought you were fine." That was the moment she realized something important. He wasn't holding on to those memories the way she was. It wasn't that he didn't care, but that they had never talked about it. Many of us wait for the perfect moment to bring up old wounds, but there is no perfect moment. Only the choice to begin. If unspoken resentment is building between you and your husband, start small. Share one thing that's been on your heart, not in anger, but with honesty. Not every conversation will end in immediate resolution, but opening the door is the first step. And sometimes, just being heard is enough to begin healing. 4. Physical intimacy has changed, and it feels unspoken. Margaret couldn't remember the last time Richard reached for her hand without reason. Their touch, once second nature, had become almost incidental, brushing past each other in the kitchen, a pat on the back instead of a lingering embrace. She didn't expect the fiery passion of their younger years, but the absence of any physical closeness made her feel like a roommate rather than a wife. She hesitated to bring it up. Was she overthinking? Was it just part of getting older? But deep down, she missed the comfort of his arms, the reassurance of a kiss on the forehead, and she knew she wasn't alone. Physical intimacy shifts with age, but it doesn't have to disappear. The problem isn't just the change itself, it's that nobody talks about it. Women hesitate, worried they'll sound needy. Men assume their wives no longer desire closeness. And so, both sit in silent longing, unsure how to bridge the space between them. Margaret decided to test a small theory. One evening, instead of sitting in her usual spot on the couch, she sat beside Richard. Not across the room, not in her recliner, right next to him. At first he looked surprised, but then something unexpected happened. As they watched their favorite show, he reached over, rested his hand on hers, and squeezed lightly. That one small shift reminded her, intimacy isn't just about grand gestures. It's about presence, about choosing connection in small ways. If this distance feels familiar, start small. A touch on the arm, sitting a little closer, even a simple, unexpected compliment. Physical closeness isn't just about romance. It's about reminding each other that love still exists in the space between your hands. 5. He processes aging differently than you do. Margaret had always embraced aging with curiosity. She saw it as a new chapter, a chance to reflect, grow, and enjoy the life she had built. But Richard, he saw it as a slow decline. Every new ache, every forgotten word, felt like proof that time was winning. She first noticed the difference when she suggested taking a short trip to visit their daughter. "I don't know, Margaret." Richard sighed. "I don't feel up for it. Too much hassle." It wasn't the first time he had turned something down. Over the years, he had grown more reluctant, less willing to go out, less interested in making plans. The man who once loved to drive cross-country, who used to tease her for overpacking, now seemed perfectly content, shrinking his world down to the living room. Aging isn't just physical, it's psychological, and men in particular often process it differently. Where many women seek new meaning in this phase of life, men can struggle with what they feel they're losing. They may not voice their fears, but they show them through avoidance, frustration, or pulling away. Margaret knew pushing Richard wouldn't work. Instead, she changed her approach. "What's something you've always wanted to do but never had time for?" she asked one evening. He was quiet for a while, then finally said, "Always wanted to learn how to paint." It was a small crack in the wall he had built around himself. The next week, she surprised him with a beginner's painting set. He laughed and grumbled that he was too old to start, but a few days later, she found him at the kitchen table, brush in hand. If your husband seems to be retreating inward, don't try to push him out. Instead, meet him where he is. Find a way to spark curiosity, rather than focusing on what's being lost. Sometimes, the best way to help someone move forward is to remind them there's still so much ahead. 6. He assumes you're content, but you're not. Margaret always thought Richard could read her well. After all, they had spent decades together. Surely he could sense when she was feeling lonely, right? But the truth was, he didn't. He never had. And it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because she never actually told him. Women often assume that after so many years together, their husbands should just know when they're unhappy. But here's the hard truth. Men aren't mind readers. For years, Margaret had waited for Richard to notice that she missed their long talks, that she craved more connection. But she never said the words out loud. She only hinted, hoping he'd pick up on it. He never did. One evening, instead of dropping passive hints, she decided to try something different. "I miss you," she said simply. Richard frowned, confused. "I'm right here." "No," she sighed. "I mean, I miss us. The way we used to talk. The way we used to laugh together. I don't want us to just exist side by side. I want us to connect again." He was quiet for a long time, then finally nodded. "I didn't know you felt that way." That was the moment she realized something crucial. He had never assumed she was unhappy, because she never told him she was. If you've been feeling distant from your husband, ask yourself, does he even know? Not through sighs or subtle gestures, but through words. It's scary to be that vulnerable, but sometimes saying it out loud is the only way to create change. The reality is, after so many years together, silence becomes easier than conversation. But silence doesn't heal distance. Only honesty does. 7. You've both stopped creating new memories. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, flipping through an old photo album. Pages filled with faded Polaroids and candid snapshots. Her and Richard on their honeymoon, holding hands at their daughter's wedding, laughing at a picnic long ago. She traced the edges of the pictures, feeling a pang of nostalgia. When was the last time they had taken a photo together? Not just posed for a holiday picture, but really captured a moment of joy. It dawned on her that their life had become a series of repeated days. Wake up, routine, small talk, television, bed. No new adventures, no unexpected laughter, no fresh memories being made. It's easy to fall into a rhythm of routine, especially in long-term marriages. But without new shared experiences, the connection starts to fade. The past becomes the only thing holding you together, and while nostalgia is beautiful, it can't replace actively living in the present. So Margaret made a decision. The next morning, she walked into the living room where Richard was reading the newspaper. "How about we go somewhere new today?" she suggested. Richard peered over his glasses. "Go where?" "Anywhere. A drive to a town we've never been. A cafe we've never tried. Just something different." He hesitated but eventually agreed. And that afternoon, as they sipped coffee in a tiny cafe they had never visited before, Margaret saw something she hadn't seen in a while, a sparkle of curiosity in his eyes. Creating new memories doesn't have to mean grand vacations or expensive outings. It's about breaking the cycle of routine, finding small moments of spontaneity, and reminding each other that there's still life to be lived together. 8. He's more focused on his health, or lack of it, than the relationship. Lately, every conversation between Margaret and Richard seemed to revolve around doctor visits, medications, or the latest ailment. She understood that aging came with its share of challenges, but it felt like their relationship had been placed in the background, with his health concerns taking center stage. She knew he wasn't doing it on purpose. He wasn't trying to pull away. He was simply preoccupied with his body's changes in a way she couldn't fully relate to. And that's a common shift in long-term relationships. Men, particularly as they age, often become hyper-aware of their physical decline. It's not just about aches and pains. It's about feeling like they're losing control over their bodies, their independence, and their sense of vitality. That fear can make them withdraw emotionally or become irritable without realizing it. Margaret recognized that dismissing his concerns wouldn't help. Instead of saying, "You always talk about your health," she tried a different approach. One evening, after listening to Richard list his latest symptoms, she gently asked, "What's the part that worries you most?" He looked at her, surprised. Then after a pause, he admitted, "I just don't feel like myself anymore." That was the moment she saw past the complaints and into the fear beneath them. Instead of letting his health concerns push them apart, Margaret started finding ways to reassure him emotionally. She encouraged small activities that made him feel capable, like fixing a loose doorknob or organizing their bookshelf. Little things, but ones that reminded him he still had strength, still had purpose. If your husband seems consumed by his health, try looking beyond the complaints. Sometimes, it's not just about the physical discomfort. It's about feeling like time is slipping away. A little reassurance, a reminder that he's still valued beyond his ailments, can make all the difference. 9. Silent expectations are leading to disappointment. Margaret used to believe that after so many years together, Richard just knew what she needed. If she seemed lonely, he should sense it. If she needed more support, he should just understand. But here's the truth about silent expectations. They lead to silent disappointments. One morning, Margaret found herself frustrated. She had spent all day organizing the house, hoping Richard would notice and offer to help. He didn't. Instead, he sat reading, oblivious to the effort she had put in. By evening, she was resentful. But instead of confronting him, she sighed loudly, hoping he'd ask what was wrong. When he didn't, she snapped, "I wish you just helped me without me having to ask." Richard looked startled. "I didn't know you needed help," he said honestly. And that was the problem. He didn't know, because she never actually told him. Many women fall into this pattern. We expect our partners to anticipate our needs, but men aren't wired that way. They don't always notice subtle hints, and they certainly don't interpret sighs and side glances the way we do. After that moment, Margaret made a shift. Instead of assuming Richard would just get it, she started communicating directly. Instead of, "I wish you'd help me more around the house," she tried, "Could you help me organize the pantry today?" Instead of, "I feel unappreciated," she tried, "It would mean a lot if you told me you appreciate what I do." And guess what? Richard responded, not because he had suddenly changed, but because he finally knew what she needed from him. Silent expectations only create hidden frustrations. The next time you find yourself feeling unseen or unheard, ask yourself, have I voiced what I need? You might be surprised at how much changes with a little clarity. 10. If you want change, you have to initiate it. Margaret sat across from Richard at the dinner table, watching as he stirred his soup absent-mindedly. The silence between them was thick, not uncomfortable, but familiar, predictable. She had spent so much time waiting for him to take the first step, to reach out, to notice the changes in their relationship, but that moment never came. And then it hit her. Maybe he wasn't holding back out of indifference. Maybe he simply didn't realize anything was missing. Many women wait for their husbands to be the ones to initiate change, to suddenly wake up one morning, see the emotional distance, and make an effort to close the gap. But the truth? Most men don't think that way. They settle into patterns, assuming that if their wives aren't saying anything, everything must be fine. So Margaret made a choice. Instead of waiting, she decided to lead. One evening, she turned off the television and sat next to him. "I miss you," she said, repeating the words she had once been too afraid to say. Richard blinked, looking at her carefully. "I didn't know you felt that way," he admitted. That was all the confirmation she needed. It's easy to assume that after decades together, our partners should sense what we need. But relationships, no matter how long they've lasted, require intention. If you're longing for more connection, take the first step. Reach for his hand, start a conversation, reintroduce a lost tradition. The effort doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be consistent. Because love doesn't fade from lack of passion. It fades from lack of attention. Bringing it back is often as simple as choosing to begin. 11. Laughter and playfulness haven't been prioritized. Margaret used to love how Richard made her laugh. He had a way of turning even the most frustrating situations into something amusing, like the time they got lost on vacation, and he joked that they should just start a new life wherever they ended up. Or the time she burned dinner, and he cheerfully ordered pizza, calling it gourmet improvisation. But somewhere along the way, laughter had faded. Life had become serious. Health concerns, financial worries, the exhaustion of everyday routines. And without laughter, their connection had become transactional. She realized this one afternoon when she saw an old couple at the park. They were teasing each other over a game of chess, laughing like teenagers. It struck her. Why had she and Richard stopped having fun together? Laughter isn't just about humor. It's about connection. It reminds us that our partner isn't just our companion in life's responsibilities, but someone we genuinely enjoy. So Margaret made a small change. She started teasing Richard again, playfully nudging him when he grumbled about the news. She pulled out an old board game they used to play and challenged him to a match. She cracked jokes, even if they weren't all that funny. And something shifted. At first, he resisted, grumbling about being too old for that nonsense. But little by little, she saw the corners of his mouth twitch, the way his shoulders relaxed when he chuckled. Bringing back playfulness doesn't require big gestures. It can be as simple as laughing at the absurdity of life together. A small joke, a playful nudge, a silly game. If you want to feel closer again, relearn how to have fun together. Because love, in its deepest form, is found in the joy we share. 12. You still have time, if you use it wisely. Margaret always thought she and Richard had all the time in the world. But lately, time felt different. It moved faster, days blending into weeks, weeks into months. She found herself wondering, how many more seasons will we have together? It wasn't a sad thought, just a realization. Time wasn't infinite, and if they didn't use it wisely, they could wake up one day and realize they had spent their final years side by side, but never truly with each other. Many couples in long-term marriages fall into this trap. They assume they'll always have another day, another opportunity to fix what's broken, to reconnect, to say the things they've left unsaid. But time has a way of slipping through our fingers, and love needs to be nurtured while we still have the chance. Margaret didn't want to live with regrets, so she started making small but meaningful choices. She set aside intentional time with Richard, not just for necessary conversations, but for quality moments. They started eating dinner at the table again, without distractions. They took short walks, even if just around the block. She made sure to say, "I love you" before bed, even if the day had been mundane. And the most surprising part? Richard responded. Not all at once, not with grand romantic gestures, but in small, steady ways. The distance that had once seemed so wide was slowly closing. If you're feeling distant from your husband, remember this. You still have time to change that, but only if you choose to use it. Because at the end of the day, it's not about waiting for love to return. It's about choosing, every single day, to create it. All right, let's be real. Marriage at this stage isn't about candlelit dinners and stolen kisses. Though, hey, if that's still happening, go you. It's about choosing each other every single day, even when he snores like a chainsaw or asks where the remote is while holding it. But here's the good news. It's never too late to bring back warmth, laughter, and connection. Small moments matter. A shared joke, a thoughtful touch, even just sitting closer on the couch instead of opposite ends like TV show rivals.